Greetings, sheeple of wherever you're from. I can't believe I just said that unironically. Let's try that again. Am I paranoid? An NPC wonders to herself as she roams the streets of a fictionalized Shibuya. Or am I being watched? Why are there so many security cameras? I'm similarly intrigued by the cameras of Square Enix's Neo: The World Ends With You. Heyo! Most games don't look like this. But if you know anything about The World Ends With You, you know that the weird, distorted, wide-angle lens and GoPro surveillance aesthetic is appropriate. It's unsettling, voyeuristic, and yet completely in line with the premise of the thing. Originally released in 2007 on the Nintendo DS, before getting mobile and Switch updates over the following next decade, the original World Ends With You took place in the UG, or underground, version of Japan's Shibuya district, not to be confused with the RG, or real ground Shibuya, which exists on the plane of existence you and I occupy. Probably? You go to the UG when you die, and there you are forced to participate in the Reaper's game. If you win, you get one wish. If you win, you have a shot at coming back to life. The original game is known for being a cult classic, and 2021's Neo is a sequel a long time coming. It follows the same premise, but for a new cast of characters, although the old are still very much present, lingering in unknown shadows. If you haven't had a chance to get acquainted with the cast of the past, the first game also has an anime adaptation, released just a few months shy of Neo. It documents original protagonist Neku Sakuraba's journey from brooding misanthropic loner to team player and legendary victor of the Reaper's game. Because the anime came out so long after the DS game, it modernizes certain elements retroactively. Flip phones are now smartphones, for example. Neo goes on to build on this version of the world rather than the one stuck in 2007. That's important, because Neo takes place a mere 3 years later, and yet it is monumentally concerned with modern technology and all the baggage that comes with it. Meet Rindo Kanade, Neo's new protagonist, and a character a far cry and a half from Neku. Veteran players will recall Beat's nickname for Neku, Phones, after the headphones he kept strapped over his ears at all times. Neku's headphones were a symbol of his isolation, a physical manifestation of how he shut himself off from the world, of how his world ends with him. And if Rindo has a similar object he latches onto, it's his cell phone. He's plugged in all the time. He visibly holds onto it even during gameplay. He follows and draws on advice from an online poet named Another. He plays Fango, an AR creature collecting game and obvious analog for Pokemon Go. And he's in constant communication with an online-only friend named Swallow, who may or may not be in the UG with him. Meanwhile, Rindo's phone mirrors his face mask, a dark covering over his mouth. Whereas Neku was unwilling to listen to others, Rindo is reluctant to make himself heard. He relies on his online friends to make decisions for him instead. Unlike Neku, Rindo is also accompanied to the UG by one of his few in-person friends, meme-loving lovable chatterbox Fret. Their trio is rounded out by otaku college student Nagi, a character with several parasocial relationships, not the least of which is with a fictional character from her favorite video game series. The World Ends With You occupies this interesting space in Square's expansive JRPG lineup, with its focus on a modern urban world and all of its accompanying concerns, cultures, and trends. Your team's powers come from branded clothes and collectible pins. You level up stats by exploring the city and dining at popular restaurants. In some ways, it feels more intimate than the epic worlds of its sister titles, and in some ways it feels more impersonal. You're a face in a crowd, a ghost, unobservable by the real hustle and bustle of the RG. The city of Shibuya is as much a main character as Neku, Rindo, Fret, or Nagi. And in this game, the camera is too.
Greetings, sheeple of Shibuya. Got some red-hot news for you.
The distance between Neo's camera and its player character perfectly captures this isolation.
A new game has finally begun.
Rindo stands out because of his brightly colored costume and exaggerated design, so you know where you are at all times. But he also runs straight through crowds of faceless pedestrians, who take up just as much, or just as little, of the screen as he does.
I don't know what's going on, or what any of this means.
You can't talk to them, but in the UG you can read their minds. Minds filled with thoughts that appear in speech bubbles paired with weirdly one-dimensional social media handles. It's hilarious, but also in line with The World Ends With You's main vibe. On the surface, everyone is an archetype blown up to an 11. There's no mistaking one character's dialogue from the others, because no two people are obsessed with the same niche, at least not publicly. This guy loves math, this guy loves travel, and this camera lens thinks very few of those differences matter. Under its distant gaze, you're all the same. You're essential cogs in the machine that keeps Shibuya, its culture, its commerce running. You're all in it together. The camera emulates a wide-angle lens, typically used for landscape photography. Fittingly enough, landscape is the thing that dominates the majority of Neo's screens. A stylized Shibuya lovingly recreated in gorgeous cel-shaded graphics. Its towering malls and skyscrapers loom tall, warping and distorting in bizarre arcs along the skyline as you navigate from the ground level. I mean, look at the backgrounds here! Here, watch this. There's the sense of vibration and thump to the way the buildings warp, a sense of concussion echoing across earth and sky both, which is fitting given Takeharu Ishimoto's boisterous, blaring soundtrack. When static, it's easy to buy these as locations from our real world, but in motion they capture the weird, fluid limbo-ness of them being in an altered, astral, afterlife-y plane. It feels the most pronounced in the game's more linear areas, such as Cat Street and Tipsy Toes Hall, both of which you explore in a mostly straight line. The buildings wrap themselves towards each other, but as you approach them they bend away, almost as if to make space for you. Tsutaya-o East is another narrow linear street, this time shot from overhead. The title card for it is a rolling film reel, so fittingly enough, as you run up and down, the street kind of unrolls itself. This all builds nicely on the aesthetic of the first game, where the 2D backgrounds would distort in similar ways. Back then, it gave off the impression of a city that was large with always more to see on the horizon, but also fluid, ever malleable. Neo adopts a similar look but now in 3D cel shading, in some ways amplifying the effect. It makes sense. Returning characters often comment on how much their old stomping grounds have changed.
If you'd like to settle down for a sec, I'll field your questions one at a time.
Series director Tatsuya Kando and game director Hiroyuki Ito talk more about this in an interview published in the game's official guidebook, made available online by Cecily at KH Insider. They reveal the initial plan had been to use a free camera, controlled with the right stick. However, this was later changed in development to emphasize the worldview of The World Ends With You through the distortion of buildings and other visual effects. Ito explains, "The previous game had a very strong personality, so we had to think hard about how to recreate that in 3D. The way the buildings on the field appear warped is one of the ideas we incorporated as a unique feature of this game. The distortion changes depending on Rindo's position on the field, so it was very difficult to make the right adjustments." In another interview with Dengeki Online, this time translated by KH Insider's Joey, Kondo says, "It may look like a wide-angle lens, but it's actually a building that's being distorted by vertex animation. We've also included other ways to make each location memorable, so please look forward to it." The other consequence of this is how much of the screen it gives to big brand names, looming over our heroes on giant signs posted across the city. If these weren't fictional brands, it would almost feel like paid product placement. But it isn't. It's intentionally framed to dominate your field of view, not to sell you products, but to sell you a vision of this world. Materialistic and often obsessed with luxury goods. Brand recognition gives you street cred, and you need street cred in Neo's Shibuya. Plus, your fashion choices are a way of self-expression, a way to continue to define yourself even in death. These brands all have their own character after all, reflected nicely by how the storefronts present themselves. There's the fancy reflective glass in Tokyo Plaza that leads into one of the city's most bougie, expensive outlets. We look up from a low-angle shot that makes the store look large and powerful, makes its presence felt. On the flip side, there's the Hawker's Market, tucked away in a corner of Takeshita Street. The camera is aimed from eye level, fairly directly at the store you can visit, and the logo is small but prominent. This place stands out through how visible the pins and available items are, cramped together on display at the storefront.
What is it? I think it's called guerrilla art.
Not even amnesia could wipe an eyesore like that.
No two hub areas are shot the same way either. Consider the famous Scramble Crossing, where the majority of your challenges begin. Usually, it's seen from an aerial view. Your eyes are drawn to its most iconic features, which are all on the street level. The crossing itself, or the Hachiko statue where the team meets up. Any camera movement feels like it's on a drone tracking the main character. It feels fitting for this introductory area to be filmed from overhead. The first game had a mostly aerial view too, you know? But as paths branch out, so do Neo's camera tricks and techniques. Once you hit the 104 building, the camera is absolutely glued to the ground. Again, a low-angle shot looking up at a towering structure, letting 104 dominate the skyline. When you run forward, it dollies after you as if on rails, forever reluctant to lift off the ground, unless you actually go in. But when you backtrack from 104 to Scramble Crossing, the camera does finally lift off, to preempt you for the change back to aerial view. It's a neat little transitional touch. Meanwhile, consider Dogenzaka. It's filmed from the side at first, the camera positioned at eye level across the street. It follows you on a horizontal track. When you hit the slope, however, it changes. It kind of moves upwards with you. Company logos peek out from the sides, every bit as ostentatious as anywhere else in the city, but Dogenzaka hides a grungy alleyway somewhere past all that. If you slide in there, the angles change. Like, a lot. Instead of looking up at big brands, you find yourself looking down on colorful but edgy graffiti. It would be impossible to cover just how many techniques Neo uses throughout its map, all to interesting effect. But the last location I'd like to draw our attention to is Spain Hill. This is a fun one. If you're climbing up the slope, you'll typically be doing so in a straight line, with the camera following you normally. But if you drift towards the side near any of its many stores, it'll pan to highlight it. It's reminiscent of Dogenzaka at first, but the brand presence amps up until you hit the peak, where you encounter a large department store. The camera suddenly glues itself to a specific corner of the ground. It's extremely rigid, reluctant to move away from the main highlight. Barco, a massive shopping center framed to entice you forward. Come in, buy a shirt or two. You like pins, right? We got pins! Like 104, Barco is a real-life location in Shibuya. And like 104, the positioning of the camera ensures it takes up appropriate real estate on the screen. At this stage, you have the option to leave to the next screen or climb up to the building's upper level. Doing the latter will shift the camera again, but this time it's actually not to highlight a logo. Instead, a beautiful mural overlooks Rindo as he sprints up the front steps. At the top, an aerial view overlooks your romp through Barco's roof gardens. As a whole, Spain Hill combines several of the other area's camera setups into one hub, using each at carefully picked spots to tell a continuous story. In another interview with Dengeki Online, Ito talks about this in more detail too. Since this interview was released in Japanese, I asked a friend to look at it for me and she was kind enough to translate the relevant quotes for the video. Thank you so much, T, for your time and effort and for providing the following translation. We exaggerated the appearances of some locations by purposely using the camera to bend the polygons and not having the correct streets appear. For example, adjusting the angles of view to show the various close-ups of Spain Hill's slope area and creating compositions looking up at the 104 building. 4Gamer released another interview on the same day, which, again, big thanks to T, we also have a quote from. The previous work's background was depicted in 2D with distorted perspective scenery, so now we applied that same characteristic into 3D. After doing the location scouting of the real Shibuya, the newest Shibuya reappears while preserving its The World Ends With You likeness. While playing around with the top-of-the-line CGI, the camera is placed at a particular angle, and is presented in a space similar to trompe-l'oeil in a warped 3D atmosphere. Trompe-l'oeil refers to an art technique that uses realistic imagery in a way that deceives the viewer's eyes into believing the image is three-dimensional. At this point, I've talked a fair amount about the game's aesthetic and many of the ways its camera moves.
What's going on?
But why does Neo look like this? I posit that the camera is working overtime on multiple levels. First up, let's talk about characterization. These buildings and brands don't just loom physically over our heroes, they live rent-free in their heads. Characters have preferences, and often define themselves by their relationships with certain brands, even if those relationships are largely parasocial. In turn, companies track their brand loyalty and reward them for showing off their products. Again, this all ties back to the story's use of cell phones, which were present in the original and are now doubly important in Neo. The central trio is extremely online. They cycle through multiple apps and express their obsessions with many of the names and influencers on them. They have varying degrees of knowledge about who's who in Shibuya and whose opinions matter. Hell, you unlock new in-game perks by networking. Rindo, Fret, and Nagi are all socially awkward in different ways, and Rindo especially has an easier time making friends online than he does in real life. But how much of the influencers we look up to are we seeing when we hit like on their posts? How much of it is just window dressing? How much of it is performative? In today's landscape, shaped by PR and social media and perpetually connected and perpetually public-facing, it's hard to find your authentic voice. Where do the lines blur between what I share with people online and what I know to be true about myself? It's a hard question, but one I think the game tackles smartly. It doesn't romanticize the idea of celebrity and, in fact, directly confronts the dangers of putting one on a pedestal in your head. But it also does so without vilifying technology. It goes out of its way to show that bonds forged virtually can be as real as those forged in person, so long as they are mutually supportive.
Rin, dude. You okay?
I want to revisit the Dogenzaka alleyways and the Spain Hill mural for a second. I've mentioned that the camera usually highlights big brand names, but the other prominent feature of The World Ends With You's aesthetic has always been street art, whether it be through murals or graffiti, including a wall you can slowly populate yourself.
Let's keep it up!
Understood.
Thanks for the help!
Shibuya's street art scene makes a significant impact on our characters. Rindo looks up to the anonymous social media poet Another, and in the original game, Neku looked up to the anonymous street artist Cat. While some characters feel seen by licensed brands, others feel the same about anti-establishment art. It would be easy for the game to pit these two things against each other. They're doing very different, opposite things, after all. But that's not the conversation Neo cares about. In this world, anti-establishment itself is a brand. It's a badge of honor for your personality you can proudly wear. No judgment. You do you, man, the game says. It's rough out there, so find the things that give you joy and take whatever joy you can get, like our characters do. But also beware. Don't define yourself by the tastes of others. I mentioned earlier that many of the characters can come off as archetypes, because they have such distinctive dialogue and niche-specific interests. But as the game progresses and you get to know them better and they get to know one another better, new layers and character depths are revealed. Fandom is armor. Fashion is armor, both literally and figuratively. And art is armor. You talk about the things you love so you can hide away the things you fear. I won't spoil the third act, but events begin to transpire in Shibuya that change the blue sky you've become used to. The people's consciousness becomes swept up by intrusive thoughts. Street art and company logos have this dark mist creeping over them. You see people kind of start to lose that armor, and suddenly everyone is at a crossroads. They can open up to each other and confront their innermost demons, or buckle under the pressure when the things they were once passionate about just don't evoke passion anymore. What do you do? Neo, The World Ends With You is more interested in these intimate questions around identity and personal connection than it is in any greater social commentary about consumerism. On the surface, the camera, with all its distance and indifference, would seem at odds with this, but I think rather it captures something about loneliness within a crowd, about the ever-increasing difficulty of finding space, finding a voice for yourself amidst all the noise, and about learning to live with it. Finding little pockets of peace, little cafes you and your friends return to time and again.
Hey, not bad!
And to that end,
Masterfully done.
Thanks, Nagi.
No need to thank me.
let's talk about space. The limited space Rindo takes up on screen means that there's a lot of free room for these comic panels to appear, in which characters can banter and talk during gameplay. But the most interesting use of this, I find, is when our heroes are being watched or followed. The villains following them don't even have to physically appear for you to believe they could be around the next corner. There is so much visual information on the screen at any given moment that you can't possibly process it all, so your brain fills in the blanks. When you activate your psyche to read people's minds, this effect becomes even more pronounced. Stray thoughts roam unchecked, filling your screen. A boss fight with a social media personality even uses this to interesting effect. The character brings their laptop to battle and crowdfunds new goons to come support them. They bombard your screen with tweets of support made towards them, obscuring your vision in combat. The developers take full advantage of all this to nudge the story forward, even between cutscenes. They make you so vividly aware of what's being shown on screen that you can't help but wonder, what isn't? What's being obscured? By a crowd, by an invisible wall, by distorted architecture? Or how about by a comic panel?
Whoa! Did you see that?
This brings me to my last point. We talk a lot about cameras in video games. Cameras are points of view. Camera, not writing, is the thing by which we define whether a game is first person or third person. I think most of us would agree Neo, The World Ends With You is the latter.
Nice one, Rin, dude!
But stay with me. I also think Neo's camera is, in some ways, second person. It's not because the camera is fixed, but rather where it's fixed, frequently evoking the sense that you're being spied on, surveilled, recorded. Because, yeah, you are. The Reaper's game isn't unlike a reality game show.
Fred? How come we're the only ones paying attention?
Late-game secret reports reveal that a certain character might be watching you. A mid-game side quest reveals that the commentator does try to watch you at all times. And early game, you're made to wonder where the cast of the first game is, and whether Neku, your point-of-view character, might be watching you from afar. What's with all the bird's-eye views, you know? Does it have anything to do with the mysterious birds at the end of each day? Does Swallow? And why do even random NPCs pick up on all the cameras? Meanwhile, puzzles frequently make use of the in-universe cameras on your character's phones. Spot the difference! Track down this guy based on his selfies. Study this street from 3 different angles. What common threads do all 3 of you see? What threads can only one of you see? Altogether, the game works to make you think about what a camera is and what a lens is. In an age of live streams and Instagram stories, What does it mean to watch someone? And what does it mean to be watched? That's a loaded question. Let's rewind for a sec. In an age of live streams and Instagram stories, how do you act when you're being filmed continuously for hours on end? What aspects of yourself do you show? Sorry, big question again. In an age of live streams and...
Fred, are you okay?
Rindo has the power to travel back in time.
Wait, what's happening?
When he's in the past, this nostalgic sepia filter washes over the game's screen, while you revisit the day's events in what looks like old film. Fret has the power to jog people's memories, by mentally assembling childlike crayon images of whatever he's trying to remind a person of. And Nagi has the power to dive into people's minds. Within, we find more filters, revealing how those possessed by dark thoughts see Shibuya. Green, yellow, blood red. As additional characters join you throughout the game, each reveals a different vantage point on the world, but what they often have in common is this shared concern over memory and image. The way we remember and experience things isn't objective, but colored by our own preconceptions. Colored by, filters. And it's through one of these filters, gold and wistful, that Rindo gets to rewind time and change the course of events whenever things get too out of hand.
That was close.
What is particularly interesting is how Rindo's replayability is first introduced.
Looks like the action is really heating up.
It's framed as video footage, rewinding through Rindo's eyes. This is how he perceives his powers. This is how the developers draw a parallel between his eyes and the lens of a camera. But his eyes are not the camera through which we experience the game. Why not? The distancing of the camera and the lack of control over its lens works to create this degree of separation between the character and the player. The sepia filters only make this more apparent. And at this point we're made to wonder, is the camera diegetic? Is its positioning canon to the game's story? Well, I don't know that we necessarily get an answer. What we do get is its relevance to the game's themes. The distancing between player and character, this second-person view, if you will, mirrors the distance Rindo puts between himself and his hard choices.
As I said, the decision is yours. But with that decision comes responsibility.
And so it gives us, the player, a level of distance too, over how much control we have over our player character's perspective and what that control means. Our protagonist doesn't trust himself to make decisions. He wants his friends to make them for him. He wants Swallow to make them for him. And yet, ironically, through his time travel abilities, Rindo is the one most empowered to make those choices. And so he does, again and again. And he comes to find faith in his own agency, confidence in his own voice. And as he does so, and we arrive towards the end of the game, the camera does something unexpected midway through a late boss fight. I'm about to show a brief spoiler, so skip to this timestamp if you don't want to see. Okay, ready? The camera fluctuates. Color bars. Static. It fully acknowledges its weird presence throughout the last 40-odd hours or so. And then, the facade breaks. Moments before Rindo will be forced to make the hardest choices of his life yet. I won't tell you how the game ends, of course, but our protagonist's character arc directly mirrors how the camera framed Shibuya throughout the game, as one thing on the surface, marked by presentational choices that have been carefully curated through framing, and then as something deeper, less visible within. Shibuya in Neo is an untamed, virtual, concrete jungle, completely out of our control, and yet one that you learn to love. One that you're directed to love. And that's a common thread throughout both games, what it means to love a city, a home, what it takes to protect one. Initially, you're drawn to the city because of the way the camera teaches you the city, with its brands and billboards and fancy advertisements. over time, it's because of all the stuff it can't show you. The conversations in between, the stolen moments of intimacy and inside jokes shared at your favorite boba place.
Let's
And
eat.
now we feast.
Oh man, I can't get
Doesn't
enough.
taste that bad.
The people. I grew up in a crowded city, filming home videos with my friends. And when I see that same space represented on film, in the media, even in my own dumb videos, I can't help but think about how the shots portraying it are composed. There are certain landmarks you expect people to recognize, but as a local, you catch yourself thinking about all the things just out of frame. Like the bus stop where you lost your favorite jacket, or the crappy quesadilla place just around the bend. Through its camera, Neo: The World Ends With You portrays a Shibuya that is grand and stylish and just all the things. And then it entrusts you to familiarize yourself with its layout as you go about exploring to your heart's content. But it also does so by drawing your attention to an insurmountable distance between you and Rindo, between how you see the world and how he sees it.
I will. I promise.
It's a bold choice. The developers want you to connect with him, and yet they've designed the moment-to-moment visuals in a way that you will constantly notice how removed you are from him. It works out though, or it did for me anyway, because Rindo himself feels removed from his in-person surroundings. Until he finds his resolve, he's relying on someone else to give him a nudge, so it might as well be you. After all, like him, you're a player. Like him, you're an explorer. Like him, you'll connect with these characters and by extension, the city in a way that transcends what can be seen, faults and all. And while we watch from afar and wait for him to get there, well, the world begins with you.
Systematic world, killing me. Getting number fulfills me. Take me higher, someplace I've never been. I'm about to wake up, let it begin. Watch it burn like a firebird. I'm coming back until the world is yours. The world will be mine. One step closer to the edge. I'm about to wreck, so I'm ready. If fearless play, the game is on, so bring it on. You don't know me, so I'll show you. Now you know me, all will do. I'm ready to take you. I'm right in front of you, right in front of you.